What's up, guys? This is Steve with the MMA Minute. Today, we are breaking down the main card for UFC 309. This card is headlined by the greatest fighter of all time in Jon Jones, taking on the greatest heavyweight fighter of all time in Stipe Miocic. We have 5 fights to break down. I'll give you guys my picks, who I think is going to win, and my predictions, how I think they're going to win. Timestamps are down below if you want to jump around. Make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you hear. And as always, just comment down below if you agree or if you disagree, which seems to happen quite a bit. So let's get right into it. The first fight of the night, we have Mauricio Ruffy taking on James Llontop. And what you need to know about this fight is that there are two very clear sides, two very different sides to this fight. You have the plus 550 underdog in James Llontop. You have the minus 950 favorite in Mauricio Ruffy. And really, you look at a guy like James Llontop. He is 0-2 in the UFC. He doesn't really have any sort of name value built up in the UFC. So you got to ask yourself, why is he on the main card, opening the main card here at UFC 309? And that's because he's being fed to the wolves. The UFC has a clear narrative, a clear side that they want to push. And we all know that that's Mauricio Ruffy, who is right now very green in the UFC. He doesn't have all that many fights, but he is training with the Fighting Nerds, which is probably the hottest trending gym in MMA right now. And he has glimpses of Conor McGregor. You're going to hear that comparison made a lot, because not necessarily that he's going to go dominate a fight and then talk a whole bunch of bullshit. It's the fact that he has that similar style. He has that wide leg, karate base, very technical on the feet. The defense is very solid, but really it is that explosive offense that makes him extremely dangerous, and that makes him extremely fun to watch. So as a pay-per-view opener, I understand what they're doing here. They want this fight to at least be exciting, if not just a round one destruction for Mauricio Ruffy. That's what the UFC wants to happen. The problem is that James Llontop historically is a very durable fighter. He has never been TKO or KO'd in his entire MMA career. And this is going to be a striker versus striker matchup. His striking skill set is actually pretty solid. He's coming off of a split decision loss to Slava Claus, who's another pretty high level striker in his own right. So it's not going to be easy to finish a guy like James Llontop. He does have solid 3-round cardio, and he is a pretty solid striker. So style-wise and matchup-wise, this actually could be a pretty decently competitive fight. So I do think Mauricio Ruffy is the A side. I do think he is going to win this fight, but I don't think it's going to be by knockout. And I think it's going to be more likely a 29-28, but maybe a 30-27 mixed in there type of decision win for Mauricio Ruffy. And that's where I'm going. I'll give James Llontop a little bit of credit here. He is 0-2 in the UFC so far, but I think his skill set is pretty solid, and he is durable enough to keep this fight decently competitive. So I'm not biting on that minus 950. That knockout prop's probably going to be like minus 300. I don't like it. Give me Mauricio Ruffy to win by decision. And that brings us to our next fight, Viviane Araujo taking on Karine Silva. Kind of a similar type of fight here, where we have a 37-year-old Araujo taking on a 30-year-old killer in Karine Silva. Karine Silva right now is 4-0. She has a perfect UFC record so far. And it goes round one submission, round one submission, round one submission, and then a unanimous decision win over Ariana Da Silva, formerly known as Ariana Lipski. So as she is moving up the ladder slowly and slowly, it feels like that might start catching up to her, where we used to expect round one submissions time and time again. But now that I think she's fighting the better, higher level fighters in this division, that might level out a little bit. And that kind of plays into Viviane Araujo, who has over 10 fights in the UFC, almost every single one of them going to decision. She has never been finished in the UFC before. I always thought that she had pretty decent boxing skills. She has strong takedown defense. She has good offensive grappling. I actually think, in a different world, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think this line would be a little bit closer, and I would probably be willing to take her to win this fight as an underdog. But she is 37 years old. When we look at her record, she is now 1-3 in her last 4 fights. I think we're starting to see the slowdown here. It's pretty clear while I do think Karine Silva is a very talented fighter, she does have limitations. I don't think her striking is all that good. I think, I don't want to say she's round one or bust. I do think she can go in there and give you a solid 1.5, maybe 2 rounds, but we have seen her slow down in fights because she pushes an insane grappling pace. That's just a very hectic style to enact on anybody. So yeah, if this gets dragged to decision, she's going to start to slow down. That's where another fighter can step up and maybe win the fight. I just don't think it's going to be a 37-year-old Araujo that's going to be able to do it, unfortunately, because I do think like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, she really could pull it off as an underdog. But in this day and age, 37-year-old, I think she slows down as the fight goes on as well. We've seen that a lot in her fights, so she can't really be trusted to win rounds 2 and rounds 3 that I think are going to be open if Karine Silva can't get the finish. So it's a little bit sketchy for me. I am going to go with Karine Silva to win, but again, she's a dominant fighter. She usually is finding the finish. I don't think she's going to find it here. Give me Karine Silva to win by decision. Next fight, we have the return of Bo Nickal taking on Bear Jew Paul Craig. And this is another fight at middleweight for Paul Craig. He used to fight up at 205, but he has made the cut down to 185. This is like his maybe third, maybe fourth fight at this weight class. I didn't think he'd be able to pull it off. He's 36 years old now, but he's actually looked pretty decent because he was a pretty sizable 205er. So coming down to 185, being able to make weight, he does have that size and strength advantage. But man, Bo Nickal right now sitting at minus 1150, massive favorite. That's just the story for Bo Nickal in pretty much every single one of his fights. Like, the UFC has a clear agenda. They always want to keep pushing this guy forward, but they want to do it in a way that makes him look like a future title contender. So every step of the way, that's what we've seen so far. 2-time fighter on Dana White's Contender Series, just round 1 destruction after round 1 destruction. Gets Jamie Pickett, finishes that fight fairly easy. Gets Val Woodburn, who took that fight on short notice, knocked him out in 38 seconds. Then he got Cody Brundage. While it didn't look pretty, didn't get the job done in round 1, he did find a rear naked choke in round 2. So every step of the way that he's been increasing, he's been matching that, finding the finish each step of the way. So I don't really know where I'm at with Bo Nickal. All those names that I just listed are either trash cans or just guys who just flat out quit round 1 or bust in Cody Brundage. We've seen that time and time again. A win over any of these guys doesn't really speak volumes as to where Bo Nickal is at right now. But, he's sitting at minus 1150. He's taking on a 36-year-old Paul Craig who, in my eyes, has pretty much always been submission or bust. I think he has terrible takedown defense. I think he's willing to play off his back because he knows how dangerous he is. And I think his striking is below average. So, and he doesn't really have power in his hands when he is standing. So there's a lot of paths to victory for Bo Nickal. The very obvious one, if you guys didn't know, Bo Nickal is considered one of the greatest collegiate wrestlers of all time. So he can pretty much take down anybody at will. Submission game is pretty much on point, but if he wants to win by decision, he can do that. The striking game, I think, still remains to be seen how good it is, but I do think he's been working on it clearly, and I think even though it's very obvious that Bo Nickal could go in here, wrestle Paul Craig, maybe find a submission, maybe win by a dominant 30-27 decision with, 5 takedowns, 10 minutes of control time, I think this is a perfect time for Bo Nickal to flash his striking, to show us what he has on the feet. Because again, Paul Craig, not a great striker, not a great chin. I think the durability is in question. Cutting down from 205 to 185 at 36 years old, I don't really love that for him. Even though he's been able to do it a couple times now, I still don't think he really belongs in this weight class. And I think this is going to be Bo Nickal pretty much however he wants to do it. So minus 1150 does seem insane, but I just don't really see him losing outside of a fluke submission from Paul Craig, who has been able to do that before, who has been able to play spoiler before against very, very good names like Magomed Ankalaev, like Jamal Hill. Like, these are literal former champions and current contenders right now. He's able to just off his back pull up a submission out of nowhere. Could he do that to Bo Nickal? It's in the cards. I think playing a Paul Craig submission prop is always fun to do. If Bo Nickal is going to wrestle, there's going to be submission attempts. So that's one bet you could throw in there. But I do like Bo Nickal to win by knockout. And I got to imagine the odds makers are probably going to have that as the least likely path to victory. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to say that Bo Nickal gets the job done by TKO in round 2. Next fight, we have Charles Oliveira do Bronx taking on Michael Chandler in the co-main event of the night. This is where the pay-per-view all comes together. We are all tuning in to see this fight. Even though it is a rematch, we've already seen this fight take place. And in the first fight, it is worth noting that Michael Chandler, this was a few years ago, so he is 38 years old now, so I wouldn't really say he was in his prime, but he was looking pretty solid back then. He did land some massive shots against Charles Oliveira. He was able to hurt him, and had a different ref been in there in the octagon, they may have stopped the fight. Michael Chandler could have been the 155 champ, which is pretty insane to say. But as we saw, Oliveira survives somehow, gets into the second round, and then immediately finishes Michael Chandler, pretty sure by TKO. So that fight was absolutely insane. It had everything that we can pretty much expect to happen in a fight like that, where you have Charles Oliveira, who is nasty on the feet, but the chin has always been cracked a couple times. Michael Chandler, who is just jacked out of his mind, just winging massive hooks that can knock you out at any given point. A very good wrestler who can blast a double leg at any time, take you down. But we've seen time and time again that Michael Chandler, because he is so explosive, he's got a solid 1.5 rounds in him. That's about it. He's got 1.5 rounds to get the job done. And if he doesn't, he's just flat out going to gas, and Charles Oliveira is going to take over. And even if Charles Oliveira doesn't take over in the later rounds, Charles Oliveira is also live to get a finish in round 1 or round 2. This guy is probably the most dangerous fighter in the UFC because his striking is nasty with that Muay Thai style. But if the fight goes to the ground, his submission game is probably better than anyone in maybe in UFC history. So you can expect an absolute barn burner. The over-under was set at 1.5. I think it was even money the last time I looked at it. I immediately took money on the under 1.5. But you could easily do a parlay piece, do an alternate line, like an alternate under 2.5. I think that's an absolute lock. This fight is going to end in round 1 or round 2. And it truly could be either guy because they are that dangerous. But I am going to fade Michael Chandler. He's 38 years old. He's been waiting around for Conor McGregor. That fight was never going to take place. I actually feel bad for the guy. So he finds himself in a spot where he's taking on Charles Oliveira a second time, a guy who's already beat him. I'm going with Do Bronx. I think he gets the job done. And I'm going to say this time around it's going to be a Do Bronx round 2 submission. And that brings us to the main event of the night. Jon Jones, as I said, the greatest fighter of all time, taking on Stipe Miocic, who is widely considered the greatest heavyweight of all time. So on paper, this fight should be unbelievable, right? No. A little suspense there. No. To answer your question, we have actually a 37-year-old Jon Jones past his prime who has moved up a weight class, who's been waiting over a year for the Stipe fight because Stipe is 42 years old. Jon Jones has made it clear that he just wants to add big names to his resume to create the greatest legacy of all time. Which, yes, on paper, that's going to look like a great win if he beats Stipe Miocic, but we're all going to look back. The true fans, the real fans are going to know that he just chose a 42-year-old Stipe because it's an easy fight, an easy way to add that name to his resume, and he can duck Tom Aspinall in the process. That's what's actually happening. So we're getting a 37-year-old out of his prime, Jon Jones, taking a very out of his prime Stipe Miocic, who is now 42 years old. But credit to Stipe. Like I said, I think he's pretty much the undisputed greatest heavyweight of all time. He has the best resume. I believe he has the most title defenses in this weight class. He won the trilogy with Daniel Cormier. He did win against Francis Ngannou the first time around. Junior Dos Santos. Alistair Overeem, Fabricio Verdum, Andre Arlovsky. Like, this dude has been in the UFC for a long time. He's got some OG names on his resume, and in his prime, he was that guy. I mean, he had very sharp boxing skills. He was known for his toughness. He had great offensive wrestling, great 5-round cardio. Like, he really could do it all. He was a problem, a nightmare matchup for anybody. If he was in his prime, he would absolutely give Jon Jones a run for his money. The problem is, the last time he fought was in 2021 against Francis the second time, and he got brutally decimated by a round 2 knockout. So his last win is actually not, you have to go all the way back to August of 2020 when he beat like a 40-year-old DC. So he hasn't been in the octagon. He's not active. I don't really know if he's training all that hard. I'm pretty sure he just said on the Ariel Helwani show that he pulled off a 24-hour shift at the fire department because he is a firefighter, if you didn't know. So I don't know how seriously he's taking this. He's probably just going to come in here, try to get a paycheck, and then retire. So that's where you can't really back Stipe in this fight. I understand that if you were to look at this fight 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you could absolutely say Stipe is very live to pull off the upset as a pretty sizable underdog here. I just don't see it. Jon Jones hasn't been all that active, but we know he's been training very hard, staying in shape. I think coming back to heavyweight a second time is really going to play into his favor. Getting it right the first time is always difficult, but now that this is his second go at heavyweight, I think he's going to be in pretty much optimal form. And I hate to say it, but I think Jon Jones is just going to dog walk Stipe. It might be a competitive first round, but after that, I got to imagine the cardio of Stipe isn't going to be there. The will to just survive, I don't think is going to be there. So I think Jon Jones slowly is just going to wear on him. I think he's going to utilize the wrestling as much as he possibly can. He'll probably win the exchanges on the feet. I don't think he really carries all that much nasty knockout power. But it'll be enough to just overwhelm Stipe. And I'd like to say maybe Stipe can go to decision, but I don't think that's going to happen. I am going to take Jon Jones to win this fight, and I'm going to say he gets it done. Round 3, TKO. We could be looking at some very live 12-6 elbows because that rule just got changed. Maybe just in time for Jon Jones here. He is going to be fighting with the old gloves because Jon Jones probably didn't like the new gloves, so they're going to do whatever they want because they love Jon Jones. Dana White is obsessed with Jon Jones. He gets what he wants, and he's going to win this fight, and he's not going to call out Tom Aspinall. I hope he does, but he won't. He's going to call out Alex Pereira, and it's going to be a mega fight, and he's going to win that fight and then walk off into the sunset as the greatest fighter of all time. That's all I got, guys. That's UFC 309. Again, like the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know down in the comments, and we'll see you guys next time.